Hello everyone, and welcome back to the third episode on my channel where we're covering a compare-contrast of various media publishers for various categories of Star Wars Expanded Universe content and picking which one is my favorite and just in general comparing the multiple publishers of one category together. This is my second time filming this video. I've filmed the entire thing and felt really good about it, and then the files just disappeared. So that was crushing and very disappointing, and it took a lot to try to record this video again. But here we are, and we're going to get right into this. If you haven't seen my previous two videos, I would recommend going to watch those. I think they were pretty fun, and it was really awesome to see the discourse around them. It was awesome to see everyone go vote on the polls. And it was absolutely terrific to have fun debates, a good-natured conversation in the comments regarding around which one we like best. It was an absolute blast. And so the previous videos, first I compared Bantam to Del Rey, and then I compared Dark Horse to Marvel. But today we have a three-horse race. We have three publishers of the Star Wars RPG material. Now I plan on making future videos about them in the style of the old video I did on the Galaxy magazines, the guide video I did, because there's a lot of content. There's just a lot of content to delve into. There's a huge amount of material for these Star Wars RPGs that you'd have to take a look at if you wanted to get into them. So I think it would be helpful for people who don't know really how to get into them or what the Star Wars RPG is about or don't know what to expect. I think it would be helpful to have a video where I go through in separate videos West End Games, Wizards of the Coast, and Fantasy Flight Games and cover what they're about, what there is to each one, because there is a huge amount of content. So sometimes it's helpful to see that all laid out there, you know? And so I think that would be a good video to make. And so those are coming soon. Those will take a lot of research and a lot of editing, so they are far off down the pipeline, but I've done some preliminary research on them, and I've got some early stuff written down for it. So look for that in the future. But as for right now, let's delve into which one I like best. So first of all, though, I think it's important to say I haven't played any of the RPGs. I've never played a role-player game ever. So for ranking these, I'm ranking them purely off of my enjoyment of the source books via reading. There's a lot of lore that you can glean from these, which is absolutely wonderful. There's a lot of new information that is established in these. So I just read the RPG material like books. I am blessed to have a couple, but they're very expensive. So I've been lucky enough to find a lot of digital copies archived on the internet and been able to go through them. And it has been an absolute blast, man. It's been a treat. It's been an absolute treat to go through the RPG material. I just read them like they're novels, you know, and they are absolutely wonderful with short stories and vignettes, in-universe lore, so you can enjoy these without the RPG material. If anyone says, like, oh, I don't know how to get into the RPGs, I've never played a role-player game, well, guess what? I haven't either. I haven't played one either, and I still enjoy them immensely. There is a lot here, even if you don't intend to play the games. So, with that being said, let's take a look at when the companies held the license, how long they had the opportunity to do stuff with the Star Wars brand, and how much they put out during that time. So, our first publisher is West End Games. They had the license from 1987 to 1998 when they went bankrupt because they did some poor decisions with money and funneled some money into a shoe company. It was a really weird thing, maybe money laundering, maybe bankruptcy, but either way they deserve to lose the license. It's really unfortunate because I would have loved to see them continue to pump out content. But unfortunately, they were mismanaged, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. Now, West End Games carried the flame during the dark days, during the dark, dry spell, the wilderness of the late 80s, when Star Wars content really wasn't out there outside of West End Games. So West End Games carried the torch and kept Star Wars fresh in people's minds, and it gave Star Wars fans something to still enjoy, which was really, really great. West End Games did absolutely wonderful work in keeping Star Wars alive during a really dark time for it. And it did a really wonderful job of laying groundwork for a lot of stuff that was to come. But I'll talk more about that later. During Weston Games' run with the Star Wars license, they published 73 sourcebooks and solitaire adventures. Additionally, they also published 15 adventure journals. Then Wizards of the Coast got the license after Weston Games. They got the license in 2000 and had the license until they purposely dropped it in 2010. They inherited the brand during the boom of the prequels. Star Wars was fresh in people's mind again because the prequels were coming out. And that meant Wizards of the Coast got to make material that would tie into that new material, tie into those new movies. Wizards of the Coast published 34 sourcebooks under 2 separate banners, the Star Wars role-playing game and Saga Editions subcategories. Plus, they also published a short-lived gamer magazine as well, which I'll talk about later. After Wizards of the Coast, Fantasy Flight Games got the license in 2011, and they began releasing sourcebooks for the Expanding Universe continuity in 2012, all the way until 2015 or so. Now, it does get murky because they also have published sourcebooks for the current continuity up to the present date, as well as they publish miniature games and tabletop stuff as well, up to the present time. And it gets a little tricky to decipher what's Expanding Universe, where it ends, and where canon begins. But that's not what our focus is on, is how they have continued to publish stuff for the current continuity. Our focus is on the Expanding Universe stuff that they publish, and they have published some sourcebooks that are maybe part of both, which is odd, but more on that later. Fantasy Flight Games published 38 sourcebooks that are considered to be a part of the Legends continuity by Wikipedia. The Wikipedia is not always reliable, and I would like to go through and check this myself, and when I do a video way later on about Fantasy Flight Games, a guide video, I will definitely make judgments for what's part of Legends, what's part of canon, what's part of both, what includes elements of both, because it's definitely fascinating, and it's kind of hard to parse. They published sourcebooks for the Expanding Universe under the Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force of Destiny lines of sourcebooks, and under that they had 2 separate categories. They had your sourcebooks and your adventures, which were more lore-centric. Now, I'd like to highlight some things about all of these separate publishers, and I'll go through them first with Weston Games. One thing I observed about Weston Games is they had so much passion and creativity poured into their works. You could feel the love that these people had. These were super fans who were getting to play in the Star Wars sandbox, and they were loving every second of it and making the most of it. You can feel how much love and adoration there is for Star Wars in the writings for Weston Games. Also, the storytelling is so fascinating and creative and out of the box. Each sourcebook breathed new creative life into Star Wars. Each one feels distinct and like it has a story to tell and is important. And so that is why I love Weston Games, the passion and creativity and love that was just poured into these sourcebooks. I'd like to highlight some of my favorite parts of Weston Games. There's the Tales of the Jedi sourcebook, which is absolutely incredible and has some great short story content in there. I have reviews of a lot of them on my channel, and Marcel, the Revanchist, has readings of, I think, all of them that are in here. There's just dozens of these short stories in the Tales of the Jedi Companion that give character and give depth to some of the background and secondary characters of Tales of the Jedi. It's absolutely wonderful, and the Tales of the Jedi Companion is one of the best sourcebooks in the EU. Alien Encounters is also really, really fun. This isn't your standard aliens guide for Star Wars that has, Gamorreans, Mon Calamari, Quarrens, Nautilans, and Bith. This has Balonaka and Laboy and Agonoths and all of these really wacky, zany, fun, interesting aliens that are so out of the box they had my eyebrows raised. There's some super cool, zany, obscure, in-depth, just off-the-walls designs. The art in here is phenomenal, and the passion that goes into the biography and the in-depth background on all of these aliens is super inspiring and really, really cool. I'd also recommend the Galaxy Guide series, specifically the Mos Eisley one. I think that's the 7th or 8th. It's absolutely wonderful. There's a lot of short stories, ties into the Mos Eisley Cantina. Additionally, there's 2 Alien volumes, one called Alien Races and one called Aliens, Enemies, and Adversaries. Both of those are really, really solid as well. The Galaxy Guides for the movie trilogy itself is really good as well. Lots of good short story content in there too. Additionally, the Planet Collection is really, really good. It was basically the Essential Atlas before there was an Essential Atlas, and it really expanded some sectors of the galaxy and planets and species and cultures and politics, and it's just really, really good. I'd also love to point out the Thrawn trilogy sourcebooks for Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. These are really, really good. Additionally, the Truce at Bakura sourcebook and the Han Solo and the Corporate Sector sourcebooks are also really, really amazing. They featured short stories and vignettes that were written by Timothy Zahn and Kathy Tyers that were put into them. They really expand on the respective books and just pad it out and give it background and give it depth, and that's really what's so beautiful about them. Additionally, the other space adventures are so super cool. Obviously, Supernatural Encounters picked up from those plot threads. Such an inventive and interesting concept. I absolutely love it. Additionally, the Dark Strider campaign is a really popular one that people point to. I'm not done reading it. I've only read the first stuff. I've not gotten to, Endgame is one of the later ones I know. It's absolutely wonderful. It's so fascinating and intriguing and kind of dark, but also so interesting. It definitely had an impact because those events are referenced later on in a lot of other material throughout the expanding universe. I'd also highlight the Imperial Sourcebook and Rebel Alliance Sourcebook as sourcebooks that I really enjoyed. There's some good short story content in there, some good vignettes. Those are really fun as well. Also, they do a good job of really expanding upon the factions and making them even more interesting. The Kraken series were all so different, but they were all so good, and they really enriched the world of Star Wars through Kraken, who's a character I didn't particularly care about before, but I mean, these source books were wonderful. They were incredibly fascinating volumes. There's so many creative ideas in West End games. The art was absolutely wonderful too, whether it be the cover art or the art within the sketches for the black and white interior art. The art's really, really good. The characters are creative. The ideas are creative. There's short stories and vignettes and in-universe information galore in the West End Games publishing for Star Wars content. Voron Na'al, Arhul Hextraphon, and Plat Okafi are also some really, really cool characters. Some of my personal favorite characters for their, in-universe researches, in-universe historians, reporters, interviewers. And they were prominent in West End Games, and they're really fun, recurring faces who you'd see again and again. Additionally, the adventure journals are just so amazing. I can't explain it because I didn't grow up with them, but I have such a nostalgia and respect for the adventure journals. They mean a lot to me. Flipping through them, they're some of my favorite parts of Star Wars in general, and I just love them so much. Moving on to Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast, I found it to be more stat-focused and more in the box, more safe. Less experimental and creative with the license, unfortunately. There's very little art in them, like original art, which did make them blander as a comparison. The new Jedi Order sourcebook, for example, was lackluster, and the comic tie-in sourcebooks like KOTOR and Legacy, they just were mediocre. None of them were slam dunks like the West End Games book tie-in sourcebooks that I highlighted earlier that just enriched the original story and expanded on it with new short stories and in-universe content. There's just not as much content. 34 sourcebooks, they didn't publish as much. And within that, there's not as much content, like in-universe content, new information. They're just a bit drier overall. There's very, very little prose short stories and vignettes. Very, very little. But there is some good, too. The Ultimate Alien Anthology was a good one. It was a good source book with a lot of original art in it, which made it worthwhile in my opinion. Ultimate Adversaries was a really cool source book as well that had some really, really cool concepts. For example, the Star Weirds came from Ultimate Adversaries, which made it very, very fun. Threats of the Galaxy was another good source book that I enjoyed. It established some interesting things. People were talking about this in my Discord the other day, but among the many interesting things that it dealt with that Rancors are somewhat sentient in some cases and can actually speak. Which is very intriguing. The Unknown Region sourcebook is another of my personal favorites. It includes the Arwen in it, which is wonderful because that is a connection to the Alien Chronicles trilogy by Deborah Chester. Mind-blowing connection, which Supernatural Encounters picked up on, with really, really cool implications. It is absolutely so cool that those were mentioned there. Absolutely wild. Additionally, the Unknown Region sourcebook also mentions that there's multiple Star Forges, which is really, really weird, and something that I had passed over on my first read through. Corey mentioned that on one of the Super Lit streams, and I went back and revisited it, and sure enough, multiple Star Forges. Wild. Something that not a lot of people are aware of, I don't think. But on the downside, Wizards of the Coast, there's less new lore established as a whole for the source books, and they just don't feel like they are written by super fans. They feel like they're written by people who are just doing their jobs. Gamer Magazine was fun, though, and did have some good stuff in it, like Emissary of the Void tying into NJO, and some Joe Bongiorno and Rich Handley articles were really good in there. But the Gamer Magazine, it's not as good as the Adventure Journals. Moving on to Fantasy Flight Games, I have some highlights for that as well. I felt it's more in the middle of Wizards of the Coast and West End Games in terms of its focus on statistics versus in-universe lore. It's more balanced, and it feels more balanced in terms of its creativity and passion poured into it. I did feel like there was more passion and love poured into them, and what's really cool is that Leland Chee and Abel G. Pena are credited in the writing credits for helping with lore, with helping with the lore and research for the books, which, if their name's in it, you know you're in good hands, right? You know it's a good thing if Leland Chee or Abel Pena are mentioned anywhere in your writing credits. So they're mentioned as having helped out with some stuff, so that's really cool. Each of these Fantasy Flight Game sourcebooks begins with a in-universe short story. And I'm here for the short story content. That's what I like the most. That can go on a timeline, that can really, really be interesting to read. And beyond like out-of-universe reading or just like a sourcebook just telling you some cool stuff about some facts and stuff, the short stories is what I live for. The vignettes is what I love. And there's a 2 to 3 page short story at the beginning of each of these Fantasy Flight Games sourcebooks. With there's maybe 1 or 2 short stories past there in the entire run, but we get a sizable chunk of short story content at the beginning of each one. Something that was sorely lacking in Wizards of the Coast, and something that made me really love the West End Games era. So that's big points for Fantasy Flight Games there. I found that Edge of the Empire is fascinating. They did a really, really good job expanding the era, which I was really surprised about. It's something that I didn't think you could really add more to, but it did really well. There's some great Black Sun and Hut material here that's really quite good. I found Edge of the Empire to be excellent, and I think that might be because it was the first one published. So due to that, it had a lot of time to be fleshed out and really developed, and because of that, it's really, really good. Age of Rebellion felt a little formulaic. It felt like it was retreading old ground a bit more. It felt more predictable, I'd say, but it's alright for what it is. Then there's Living Force, which was the last one that came around. It's fun, and I do love me the Jedi. That's pretty much my favorite part of Star Wars, so I did enjoy the Living Force stuff. It was fun. And it did have references to the Dark Forces video game, which was really, really cool. You know, I always loved seeing that. There's a great art piece with Q Ron and Kyle Katarn in there. Edge of the Empire, though, has some really awesome, deep-cut lore references to really in-depth EU concepts. Zim the Despot is mentioned in one of the Edge of the Empire sourcebooks. That is so cool. That is so cool. I freaked out when I saw that. Clearly, Leland Chee or Abel Pena were earning their pay and making sure that these sourcebooks would have some deep cut references to the EU. So they feel like they are a part of the expanded universe because they have a lot of references to EU material, which is great points for Fantasy Flight Games. There's some good stuff there. Now, it is a bit confusing as to which ones are legends and which are canon near the end, but that's a bigger, broader topic for another time. Like, some of them seem like they're both. Like, there's one that has references to Tales of the Jedi and Rogue One in one sourcebook. So is that canon or is that legends? You know, it becomes a whole ordeal. But that's one that I'll decipher later on. I feel like some of them are probably part of both timelines. Now, there's mentions of a Compnor Clone Wars reel in one of these Fantasy Flight Games sourcebooks, which could be construed as a cool TCW retcon, as Matt Wilkins will tout it as. And we don't know if that was the actual intention of the company. Maybe it was a wink, maybe it wasn't. Maybe we can interpret it how we wish, but I was just thrilled to see more Compnor stuff, which was something that, originated with West End Games. So, absolutely wonderful stuff. Great, great, great stuff with Fantasy Flight Games. But, for ranking my favorites, it's no competition. I'm going to use my hands as a scale here to showcase that. No numbers or anything like that. But West End Games is tippy top. Absolutely wonderful. It can't be said enough what an impact West End Games had on Star Wars. Not only did it keep the fire burning in a time when there was nothing else coming out, so it was a paragon against black nothing for Star Wars. It was the last fortress. It's like how SWTOR is now for the expanded universe. But it was like that in the 80s. It was the last stronghold of Star Wars content. And I applaud it for that. And it went so out of the box and with great creative new ideas. It's no secret George Lucas loved West End Games, because why wouldn't he? There's an awesome picture of him working on TCW with a stack of West End Games books behind him, which is so cool. Additionally, West End Games, in addition to all the cool stuff I've said about it so far, George Lucas would give West End Games material to the authors of the Bantam era to use as reference. So a lot of the material and a lot of the ideas and elements and lore of the West End Games era seep their way into the Bantam era as well. Honestly, West End Games laid the framework, laid down the concrete for the expanded universe. A lot of what was established in West End Games would impact the universe for years to come. Inquisitors come from West End Games. There's so much good stuff that comes from West End Games that influence the expanded universe and influence specifically the Bantam era in a big way too. So West End Games, you can't overstate how important it was for Star Wars. The West End Games material is some of my favorite material in all of Star Wars, in all of the expanding universe. I just love it so much. There's so much passion and love in these West End Games source books and material. It's absolutely wonderful. It's amazing. So West End Games is up here. Big drop off. Fantasy Flight Games, still really solid. I really like the Fantasy Flight Games source material. There's some really cool stuff there. Like, there's some really good stuff there, for sure. But then there's a bit more of a drop off down to Wizards of the Coast, which I have in third place. There is some good stuff there, but overall I just found it to be a bit soulless in comparison to the other two. It just feels very run-of-the-mill, very half-hearted. It's just not as special as West End Games. And Fantasy Flight Games, to its credit, was really good. It was really good. It felt special. And although I'm dogging on Wizards of the Coast a little bit, it's so good. It's so good. I like the Wizards of the Coast material. I like the Fantasy Flight Games material more. And man, oh man, do I like the West End Games material the most. It is so important, I feel like. And I would recommend to every Star Wars fan, every Star Wars Expanding Universe fan, please delve into those wonderful pages. There's archives on StarWarsTimeline.net. You can go check them out. The West End Game stuff is so wonderful. So, let me know in the comments, though. What do you prefer? I imagine that West End Games is going to run away with this. I imagine there's going to be some nostalgia prompting that forward, but also they stand on their own feet regardless of nostalgia. They're just wonderful. Wizards of the Coast, I imagine there's going to be some people dogging it, and in the comments, some people dissing the Wizards of the Coast content, harping on it. And Fantasy Flight Games, I think, would be mixed. I think it could go either way. People might love it or not. We'll see. But regardless of how you feel, please let me know in the comments. Which is your top dog in the Star Wars RPGs for the expanding universe? Make sure to go vote on the poll. That'll be up as well. It'll be wonderful to get some discourse going around this, as always, and I can't wait to see what everyone thinks, what everyone's thoughts are. But for me, it's West End Games, Fantasy Flight Games, Wizards of the Coast. That's my order. Let me know in the comments. What's yours?